We have a warrant for his arrest." Gus gasped. The air knocked from her lungs. He rushed toward the dining room. "Chris," he shouted, "don't say anything. Don't say a word." It's just not my day today. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of our book club series. So, today we're going to be doing reading 8. I have to find the page because I lost it. Which is shitty, but oh well. Picking back up on page 105. This is reading number 8. That night, while Chris was in the shower, Gus ventured into his bedroom to clean up. To her surprise, the mess was contained, basically a pile of dirty dishes covered with meals that remained uneaten. She smoothed Chris's covers and then fell to her knees, instinctively checking under the bed for mismatched socks to place in the wash, for food that had unobtrusively rolled beneath. Her thumb pricked the hard edges of a shoebox before her mind could consciously register what she'd stumbled across. She reached inside. Her fingers ruffled the pages of secret codes. Filmy 3D glasses, invisible lemon juice ink messages that had been decoded over a bare light bulb. God, how old had they been? 9, 10? Gus picked up the secret message on the top. In Emily's daisy chain handwriting, it empathetically announced that Mr. Pulaski is a dork. She traced her finger over the words, "is," the I punctuated by a fat circle as if it were a balloon that might light off the page at any moment. She scrabbled beneath the loose pages and found a flashlight, batteries dead, and a mirror. Smiling, heartsick, Gus sat down on the bed and wiggled the mirror in her hand. She watched the reflection bounce off, skittering over the woods. In the window of Emily's bedroom, there was a mated flash of light. With a gasp, Gus came to her feet, walking toward the sill. She saw the silhouette of Michael Gold at Emily's bedroom window, holding in his hand a small silver square of mirror. "Michael," she whispered, raising her hand in greeting, but even as she did, she could see Emily's father drawing down the bedroom shade. Next section. On Wednesday, Bainbridge High School staged a memorial for Emily Gold. Her artwork, a legacy, dotted the auditorium. Her school picture from the previous fall had been blown up to an almost obscene size and hung from the rear curtain on the auditorium stage, a trick of the light making her gaze spookily follow the students in the audience when they shifted seats or got up to go to the bathroom. On bridge chairs in front of the picture were the principal and assistant principal, the senior guidance counselor, and Dr. Pinio, an expert on teenage depression. Chris sat in the front row with a bunch of teachers. It wasn't as if someone had saved him a seat there, but it was implicitly assumed he had the right to the space. In a way, it was kind of nice. He was able to stare at that photo of Em and not see other kids doing what everyone did during an assembly, whisper or finish their homework or feel each other up in the dark. Mrs. Kinley, who was sitting next to him, rose as the principal introduced her. As the art teacher, she probably knew Em better than anyone else. She talked for a while about how much creativity Emily had in her soul and other bullshit. But it was nice bullshit, Chris thought. Emily would have liked it. Then the doctor got up and did this weird little song and dance on teen suicide. Warning signs as if everyone in the audience had as much chance of coming down with it as they did the flu. Warning signs. Then the doctor got up and did this weird little song and dance on teen suicide. Warning signs as if everyone in the audience had as much chance of coming down with it as they did the flu. Chris picked at the leg of his jeans while the guy was speaking, aware of the man's heavy stare on his own forehead. Before Chris realized what was happening, the whole first third of the auditorium the 363 seniors were on their feet and being herded toward the rear of the room. Teachers in the back thinned the milling bunch into a single file, which snaked up the stairs of the stage. By the time each senior reached Emily's photo, he or she had been handed a carnation to toss at the foot of the portrait. It was a good idea in theory, but Chris, who was not last by association to Em, but simply because no one had realized there was a senior in the front row with all of the teachers, found it ridiculous. The flowers were being tossed into a kiddie pool that was used for a fishing game at the spring carnival. Little yellow ducks peeked through the pink flowers. Tacky, Emily would have said. When Chris reached the pool, he was standing alone on the stage. He threw the carnation on the top of the heap that had accumulated already and glanced up at the monstrous face of Emily. It was her, but it was not her. Her teeth had been airbrushed supermodel white. Her nostril was the size of his whole head. He turned to walk off the stage and saw the principal motioning him nearer. As one of her closest friends, Mr. Lawrence, was saying, "Chris Hart may have something to share with us." He felt the principal's hand clench on his shoulder, drawing him toward a podium and a microphone that looked like the head of a rattlesnake poised to strike. His hands started to shake. Chris found himself staring at a rippling field of faces. He cleared his throat. The microphone screeched. "Oh," he said, leaning back. "I'm sorry, this, is a really special thing you've all done for Emily. I'm sure she's watching somewhere." He turned a little, blinking into the floodlights. "And she'd want to say," Chris glanced at the pile of wilting flowers at the shrine they'd made to Em. He could too easily see her in the back row next to him, snorting over the cheesy display, checking her watch to see how much time was left before the bell rang. "And she'd want to say," Chris repeated. Later, he would never know where it came from, but suddenly the surfeit of emotion he'd been concealing since he'd returned to school at his father's command began to leak out of the hollow in his heart where he'd bottled it up. Overwhelmed by the smell of the flowers rotting under the lights and the garnished photo and the hundreds of faces waiting for him, of all people, to give them answers, Chris began to laugh. He laughed softly at first. That's terrible. That would be me, though. I would be that idiot. He laughed softly at first, and then a guffaw burst out, impolite and rancid as a belch. He laughed and he laughed in counterpoint to the utter silence of the auditorium. He laughed so hard he started to cry, his nose running, his eyes so blurry he could not see the podium in front of him. Chris pushed away and headed toward the stairs at the edge of the stage. He ran down the long aisle of the auditorium until he exploded through its double doors into the empty corridors of the high school, and he sped toward the locker rooms of the gym. They were empty. Everyone had been watching him, and he changed into his Speedo in record time. He left his clothes in a puddled heap on the cement floor and exited through the door that led directly to the pool. Its soothing blue surface was glass, he thought, and he imagined it shattering and slicing through him as he dove in the deep end. The healing wound on his scalp stung. The stitches had been removed only the day before, but the water was as familiar as a lover, and in its ample embrace, Chris heard nothing but his own heartbeat and the intermittent pump of the heater. He let himself float motionless underwater, glancing up occasionally at the rippling bleachers and fluorescent lights. Then, carefully, deliberately, he blew bubbles from his mouth and nose, depleting his supply of oxygen and feeling himself sink inch by excruciating inch. "Listen," the voice said, more hostile now. "Does Emily live there or not?" Melanie's fingers clenched the phone receiver so hard her knuckles went white. "No," she said, "she does not." "And is this 656-4309? "Yes." "You're sure now?" Melanie rested her head against the cold door of the pantry. "Don't call back," she said. "Leave me alone." "Look," the voice said, "I have something of Emily's. Can you just tell her that when you see her?" Melanie raised her face. "What do you have?" she asked. "Just tell her," the voice said, and hung up. Dr. Feinstein opened the adjoining door with a frown on his face. "Chris," he admonished, "you can't just run in here, you know. If you have a problem, call. But the only reason I'm free is because another patient is ill." Chris didn't bother to listen. He shoved past the psychiatrist into the office. I wasn't going to do it," he muttered. "Excuse me?" Chris lifted his face, contorted with pain. "I wasn't going to do it." Dr. Feinstein closed the office door and sat down across from Chris. "You're upset," he said. "Take a minute to calm down." He waited patiently for Chris to take several deep breaths, then sit up in his chair. "Now," the psychiatrist said, satisfied, "tell me what happened." "They had a memorial for Emily at school today." Chris scrubbed the heels of his hands against his eyes, the combination of his sorrow and residual chlorine creating a powerful sting. I feel like I have a hair somewhere. "It was totally lame with these flowers and whatever." "Is that what upset you?" "No," Chris said. "They had me go up to the stage, speak, and everyone was looking at me like I was supposed to know exactly how to make it better, what to say. 'Cause I was there, and I wanted to do what Emily did. So I should have been able to explain what happened to make us want to commit suicide." He snorted. "Like a freaking Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Hi, my name is Chris, and I wanted to kill myself." "Maybe this was their way of telling you that you're important to them." "Oh, right," Chris sneered. "Most of the kids spent the assembly throwing spitballs." "What else happened?" Chris bowed his head. "They wanted me to talk about Emily, a eulogy kind of thing. And I opened my mouth and..." He glanced up and lifted his palms. "I cracked up." "Cracked up?" "I laughed. I fucking laughed." "Chris, you've been under an extraordinary amount of stress," Dr. Feinstein said. I'm sure that when people..." "Don't you get it?" Chris exploded. "I laughed. It was this little mock funeral and I laughed." Dr. Feinstein leaned forward. "Sometimes very strong emotions cross over with each other. You've been depressed, upset, grieving." Chris stood, began to pace. "Take your pick. Am I upset that Emily died? Every damn minute, every damn breath I take. But everyone thinks I'm a basket case, one turn away from slicing open my own wrists. Everyone thinks I'm waiting for the right opportunity to try and kill myself again. The whole school thinks it. They expected me to have a breakdown, probably right at the podium. And my mother thinks it, and even you think it, don't you?" Chris glared heatedly at the doctor and took a step forward. "I'm not going to kill myself. I'm not suicidal. I was never suicidal." "Not even that night?" "No," Chris said softly. "Not even that night." Dr. Feinstein nodded slowly. "Why did you say that you were at the hospital?" Chris blanched. "Because I fainted, and then I woke up, and the cops were standing over me, holding the gun." He closed his eyes. "I got scared, so I said the first thing that made sense." Did y'all hear that? Let me just... let's just rewind. Let's just go back. Okay. And pause. Here we are. Dr. Feinstein nodded slowly. "Why did you say that you were at the hospital?" Chris blanched. "Because I fainted, and then I woke up, and the cops were standing over me, holding the gun." He closed his eyes. "I got scared, so I said the first thing that made sense." He was never suicidal. He was never going to kill himself. Oh my God. So was this not a suicide pact? I'm so confused. Okay, we got to keep going. We got to find out what's happening. Oh my goodness. Okay, I just feel like a bomb just dropped. "If you weren't going to kill yourself, why did you have a gun?" Chris sank down onto the floor, his muscles giving out. "I got it for Emily because she did want to kill herself, and I thought..." He dropped his head and spat the words out again. "I thought that I could stop her. I figured that I'd be able to talk her out of it long before we got to that point." He lifted shining eyes to Dr. Feinstein. "I'm tired of pretending," he whispered. "I wasn't going there to kill myself. I was going there to save her." Tears ran unchecked over his cheeks, soaking the front of his shirt. "Except," Chris sobbed, "I didn't." The grand jury, which currently sat in the Crafton County Superior Court, spent one day hearing Assistant Attorney General S. Barrett Delaney recount the mounting evidence against Christopher Hart in conjunction with the murder of Emily Gold. They listened to the medical examiner discuss the time and nature of the victim's death, the path of the bullet through her brain. They heard a duty officer from the Bainbridge Police Department describe the scene of the crime as he'd found it. They watched Detective Sergeant Anne Marie Marone explain the ballistic evidence. They heard the AAG ask the detective what percentage of murders were perpetrated by criminals who knew their victims. They heard the detective answer 90%. As in most grand jury hearings, the defendant was not only absent, but blissfully unaware that a court was convening in his name. At 3:46 p.m., S. Barrett Delaney was handed a sealed envelope, inside which was a paper indicting Christopher Hart on the count of murder in the first degree. "Hello, can I speak to Emily?" Melanie stilled. "Who is this?" There was hesitation. "A friend." "She's not here." Melanie clawed at the receiver, swallowing convulsively. "She's dead." "Oh." The voice on the other end seemed stupefied. "Oh." "Who is this?" Melanie repeated. "Donna, over at the Gold Rush. The jewelry store on the corner of Main and Carter." The woman cleared her throat. "Emily bought something from us. We have it ready." Melanie grabbed her car keys. "I'm on my way," she said. The drive took less than 10 minutes. Melanie parked in a spot directly in front of the jewelry store and went inside. Diamonds winked at her from within their cases. Parabolic ropes of gold rested on blue velvet. A woman, her back to Melanie, was fiddling at the cash register. She turned around with a brilliant smile, which withered and died as she took in Melanie's wild hair, her lack of a winter coat. "I'm Emily's mother," Melanie said. "Of course." Donna stared at Melanie for a full 5 seconds before her body shocked itself into response. "I'm so sorry," she said. She went to the cash register and retrieved a long, narrow box. "Your daughter ordered this some time ago. It was engraved, too," she said, lifting the lid to reveal a man's watch. "To Chris," Melanie read, "Forever love, M." She laid the watch back on its satin cushion and picked up the sales receipt. Boldly printed at the bottom was a note to the store personnel. "Gift is a secret. When calling, just ask to speak to Emily. Leave no information." Which explained the cloak and the dagger routine, she thought. But why keep it a secret? Then Melanie saw the price. $500, she exclaimed. It's 14 karat gold," the woman hastened to point out. "She was 17, Melanie said. Of course she wanted to keep this secret. If her father or I found out she'd spent that much money, we would have forced her to take it back." Clearly uncomfortable, Donna shifted. "The watch is paid for in full." She offered a concession. "Perhaps you'd still like to give the gift to the person your daughter was thinking of?" Then it struck Melanie. This would have been a birthday gift for Chris, something special to mark his turning 18. That, in Emily's mind, would justify spending a full summer's wages. Melanie picked up the box and carried it back to her car. She sat down and stared at the windshield, still seeing that incredibly ironic message. Forever. And she wondered why Emily would have ordered a watch for Chris's birthday if, as he said, they were going to kill themselves before then. Melanie had her hand on the doorknob when the telephone began to ring. She pushed inside, hurrying, some small part of her certain that this was Donna, the jeweler, calling to tell her this had all been a mistake. There was another Chris and another Emily. "Hello? Mrs. Gold? It's Barrett Delaney of the Attorney General's office. I spoke to you last week." "Yes," Melanie said, dropping the watch on the counter. "I remember." "I thought you'd want to know," Bear said, "that a grand jury indicted Christopher Hart today on the charge of first-degree murder." Melanie felt her knees give out. She slid to the floor, her legs awkwardly splayed. "I see," she said. Is there a hearing?" "Tomorrow," Barry Delaney said, "at the Grafton County Courthouse." Melanie scribbled down the name on a pad she used as a grocery list. She heard the prosecutor talking, but she was incapable of understanding another word. Softly, she replaced the receiver in its cradle. Her gaze fell on the jewelry box. Very carefully, she lifted the watch from its satin bed and rubbed her thumb over the wide face. Chris's birthday was tonight. She knew the date as well as Emily. Chris's birthday was tonight. She knew the date as well as she knew Emily's. She pictured Gus and James and even Kate sitting at their wide cherry table, their conversations tangling in knots the size of fists. She pictured Chris standing up and bending over the cake, the flicker of candles softening his features. Under different circumstances, Melanie and Michael and Emily would have been invited too. Melanie clutched the watch so tight its edges cut into her palm. She felt the rage grow inside, uncontainable. It pushed past her heart, broke through her skin, sprouting thick as an extra limb on which she gingerly, doggedly tested her weight. Everything had to be perfect. Gus stepped back from the table, then moved closer to fuss with the napkin again. The crystal goblet stood at attention, the spiral ham curled introspectively on its serving platter. The fancy china that hibernated in the hutch, with the exception of Thanksgiving and Christmas, had been arrayed in full regalia, gravy boat and all. As Gus left the dining room to call everyone in, she tried to tell herself that they were not celebrating another year of life for someone who'd wanted. She tried to tell herself that they were not celebrating another year of life for someone who wanted to prevent just that. Okay, she yelled, dinner's ready. Sorry. Hold on, okay. James, Chris, and Kate came in from the family room, where they'd been watching the early news. Kate was gesturing her hands, talking about a helium balloon the size of a Chevy that had been released with a message attached as part of a school science project. It'll maybe get to China, she exuberantly proclaimed. Australia. It won't even go around the block, Chris muttered. It will too, Kate shouted, then closed her mouth and looked into her lap. Chris glanced from his sister to his parents and slammed himself into his chair with more force than necessary. Now, Gus said, isn't this nice? Look at that cake, James said. Coconut frosting? Gus nodded. Coconut frosting? Gus nodded. With strawberry filling. Really? Chris asked, seduced in spite of himself. You made that for me? Gus nodded. It's not every day, she said, that someone turns 18. She glanced at the ham and the carrots, the sweet potato pie. In fact, she added, in honor of the event, I think we should start with the cake. Chris's eyes gleamed. You're all right, Mom, he pronounced. Gus took the pack of matches from beside the cake platter and lit the 19 candles, one for good luck. She had to strike 3 matches in all, the shafts burning down to her fingertips before she'd finished. Happy birthday to you, she sang. When nobody joined in, she stood, hands on her hips, and scowled. You want to eat, she said. You've got to sing. At that, James and Kate joined in. Chris picked up his fork, ready even before Gus managed to cut him the first slice. Does it feel different being 18? Kate asked. Oh yeah, Chris joked. Arthritis is setting in. Very funny. I meant, do you feel like smarter, mature? Chris shrugged. I could be drafted now, he said. That's the only difference. Gus opened her mouth, about to say that, thank God, there weren't any current wars, but realized this was untrue. A war was what you made of it. Just because U.S. troops were not involved did not mean Chris was not fighting. Well, James said, reaching for a second slice of cake, I think Chris should turn 18 every day. Here, here, Gus said, and Chris ducked his head, smiling. The doorbell rang. I'll get it, Gus said, tossing her napkin onto the table. It rang again just before she reached the door. She swung it open, the porch light falling on 2 uniformed police officers. Good evening, the taller officer said. Is Christopher Hart at home? Well, yes, Gus said, but we've just sat down. The officer held out a sheet of paper. We have a warrant for his arrest. Gus gasped, the air knocked from her lungs. James, she managed, and her husband appeared. He took the warrant from the policeman's hand and scanned it. On what grounds? He asked tersely. He's been charged with the murder in the 1st degree. The policeman pushed past Gus toward the lighted dining room. James, Gus said, do something. James grasped her shoulders. Call McAfee, he said. He rushed toward the dining room. Chris, he shouted, don't say anything, don't say a word. Gus nodded, but did not turn to the phone. She followed James toward the commotion in the dining room. Kate was sitting at the table, crying. Chris had been pulled out of his chair. One officer was cuffing his hands behind him. The other was reading him his rights. His eyes were huge, his face chalk white, coconut frosting trembling on his lower lip. The policemen each took one of Chris's elbows to escort him out of the house. He stumbled between them blindly, his brows drawn together in confusion, his eyes unable to light on any of the familiar furnishings of the house. At the threshold of the dining room, where Gus stood, the officers hesitated, waiting for her to step aside. In that brief pause, Chris looked directly at her. "Mommy?" he whispered. And then he was yanked away. She tried to touch him, but they'd moved too quickly, her hand hovering in midair, clenched into a fist when she pressed against her mouth. She could hear her hand hovering in midair, clenched into a fist when she pressed against her mouth. She could hear James racing around the house, calling McAfee himself. She could hear Kate hiccuping in the other room. But over all this, Gus could hear Chris, 18 years old, and calling her by an endearment he had not used in a decade. Okay, so I'm going to end it there because it says we're moving on to part 2. I didn't know there was a part 2, but yeah, so I'm going to end it at part 1, I guess. And that's also, I think, a really good cliffhanger. He just got arrested, so I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you for joining me today. I will see you guys in the next one. I think I need to do the discussion. I think I'm going to do a discussion for reading 6, 7, and 8 all together. Because there wasn't really that much that happened in 6 and 7, so I just didn't do a discussion. But maybe I'll do one now. Once there's stuff to talk about, I'll do one. But yeah, so this was reading 8, and we finished on page 115. So next time we will pick up with reading 9 on page 119. I hope that you guys have a fantastic day. I love you so much, and thank you for hanging out with me today. Goodbye.
How y'all feel out there?
I'm light years, call me eons. When the snare kick in, the beat is neon. Lights, yeah, I'm feeling magnificent. Care less what I'm up against.